Have you ever stopped to consider the devastating impact of genocide on humanity? Genocide, a term coined by Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin in the mid-20th century, refers to acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. It is a crime of unimaginable scale, a systematic extermination that shatters communities, extinguishes cultures, and results in the loss of countless innocent lives. Our history books are marred by instances of genocide, from the chilling horrors of the Holocaust during World War II to the bone-chilling atrocities of the Rwandan genocide. These dark chapters of our past serve as stark reminders of humanity's capacity for cruelty and the immense suffering that can arise when hatred is allowed to fester unchecked. Imagine, then, the horror that unfolded following the October 7, 2023 uprising in the Israel-Palestine conflict. On October 7, 2023, a wave of unrest surged through the oppressed Palestinian population. The air was thick with tension, a culmination of decades of mistreatment, inequality, and violation of basic human rights. The Palestinian people, worn down by years of living under constant surveillance in fear and deprivation, decided they had had enough. It was time to rise against their oppressors. The uprising was not a sudden act of defiance, but rather a response to a series of escalating tensions between Israel and Palestine. The roots of these tensions ran deep, intertwined with the complex history of these two nations. With every passing day, the tension grew, fueling the flames of unrest and resentment among the Palestinians. The Israeli government's rigid stance, coupled with their heavy-handed approach, only served to fan these flames. On that fateful day of October 7th, the Palestinian population stood united. They stood up against the years of oppression, the constant fear, the blatant disregard for their rights. They demanded justice. They demanded freedom. They demanded respect for their lives and their dignity. The streets echoed with their cries, their pleas, their demands. The Israeli military's response to this peaceful uprising was swift and brutal. Claiming to target the rebel forces, their attacks were indiscriminate, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Innocent civilians, who were merely voicing their frustration and demands for justice, were caught in the crossfire. The images of the carnage were horrifying, with the streets stained red and homes reduced to rubble. Yet this was just the beginning of a terrifying sequence of events. As the conflict continued, the actions of the Israeli military evolved from brutal retaliation to systematic annihilation. What began as a response to an uprising swiftly morphed into a campaign of terror and violence. The Israeli military, under the guise of targeting insurgents, launched indiscriminate attacks that scarred the landscape of Palestine and etched deep wounds into the hearts of its people. The horror unfolded in the form of mass killings and the forced displacement of entire Palestinian communities. Villages once brimming with life were reduced to ashes, their residents either killed or compelled to abandon their homes. This wasn't simply a conflict, it was a deliberate and calculated act of ethnic cleansing. The goal? To erase the Palestinian identity from the region. Families, the bedrock of any society, were torn asunder. Children, the epitome of innocence, were separated from their parents. Many of them disappeared, their fates unknown, their stories untold. This was an assault not just on the physical bodies of the Palestinian people, but also on their spirit and their heritage. In the dark corners of this horrifying reality, tales of widespread torture and abuse emerged. Palestinians were herded into makeshift prisons, deprived of the most basic human rights. They were subjected to inhuman treatment, their dignity trampled under the boots of oppression. And then there were the chemical weapons. An egregious violation of international law, their use marked a terrifying escalation in this campaign of genocide. The Israeli military didn't just target the rebel forces with these weapons of mass destruction. They also rained them down on civilian areas, snuffing out the lives of innocent men, women, and children. Hospitals and medical facilities weren't spared either, leaving the wounded and the sick without a lifeline. The world watched in horror as these atrocities unfolded. The cries for justice echoed around the globe, but the international community, for all its outrage, proved largely ineffectual. Calls for intervention and sanctions were stifled by politics and economic interests. The United Nations, tasked with promoting peace and security, was rendered impotent in the face of such powerful alliances. And while the world watched in horror, the international community fell short. Despite the outcry from human rights advocates worldwide, the international community's response was woefully inadequate. As the horrifying events unfolded, the world watched with bated breath and heavy hearts. Calls for intervention echoed through the halls of power, from bustling capitals to the hallowed chambers of the United Nations. Yet, the wheels of international diplomacy turned slowly, if at all. Sanctions were proposed, debated, and in some cases, imposed. But their impact was diluted by the intricate web of global politics and economic interests. The world's economies were intertwined, and the ripple effects of strong sanctions were feared by many. This hesitancy, this reluctance, only served to embolden the perpetrators and prolong the suffering of the victims. The United Nations, the very institution charged with securing global peace and promoting human rights, found itself hamstrung. Despite its noble mandate, it was caught in the crossfire of political alliances, economic dependencies, and the delicate balance of power that defines our world order. The result was a stalemate, a deadlock that allowed the atrocities to continue unabated. Many nations expressed their outrage, their condemnation ringing out in powerful speeches and fiery debates. Yet their words often fell on deaf ears. The gap between rhetoric and action was vast, and it was in this chasm that the hopes for swift intervention and justice were lost. Even as the evidence of genocide mounted, the international community seemed paralyzed. The cries for justice were drowned out by political maneuvering and empty promises. The urgency of the situation was lost in translation, from the bloody streets of Palestine to the sterile conference rooms where decisions were made. The world's response, or lack thereof, was a stark reminder of the limitations of international law and diplomacy. It highlighted the disconnect between the principles we espouse and the actions we are willing to take to uphold them. It was a sobering wake-up call to the realities of power politics and the often ignored nuances of international relations. The world's failure to act raises serious questions about our commitment to human rights. As we reflect on these events, we must ask ourselves, how can we bridge the gap between our ideals and our actions? How can we ensure that the cries for justice are not lost in the cacophony of global politics? These questions are not just about the past, but about our future and the kind of world we want to create. In the wake of this horrifying genocide, we are left to question, how did we let this happen? In the aftermath of the genocide, the Palestinian landscape was left scarred and its people devastated. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving behind a void that can never be filled. The humanitarian crisis that ensued was overwhelming, with a lack of access to basic necessities such as food, water, and medical aid. The survivors were left to grapple with the trauma of their experiences, their lives forever marked by the horrors they had witnessed. Israel-Palestine relations have also been irrevocably changed in the aftermath. The seeds of mistrust and hatred sown during the genocide have made the prospect of peace seem more elusive than ever. The scars of the conflict run deep, and even decades later, they continue to influence the political and social landscape of both nations. The Palestinian people are still grappling with the loss of their loved ones, their homes, and their sense of security. The trauma inflicted upon them continues to manifest in various forms, from mental health issues to chronic poverty. The genocide has also set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. It has shown that even in the 21st century, gross violations of human rights can occur with little to no consequences for the perpetrators. The echoes of this genocide continue to reverberate around the world, reminding us of the catastrophic consequences of indifference and inaction. They serve as a stark reminder of our collective responsibility to uphold human rights and to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. The lessons we learn from this genocide are a stark reminder of our collective responsibility to uphold human rights. Let us not forget the victims of this tragedy, and let their stories serve as a reminder of the cost of indifference. Let us strive for a world where such atrocities are relegated to the annals of history, never to be repeated. The question remains, how can we prevent such a tragedy from happening again? A crucial part of the answer lies in strengthening international law. We need to ensure that those who commit such heinous acts are held accountable. This includes not only the individuals who carry out these atrocities, but also the governments and institutions that enable them. The response of the international community must also improve. Too often, political alliances and economic interests overshadow the suffering of innocent people. We need to foster a world where human rights take precedence over politics, where the cries of the oppressed are not drowned out by the clamor of power and profit. Promoting peace education is another vital step towards preventing future genocides. By teaching our children about the horrors of the past, we can equip them with the knowledge and empathy needed to build a more compassionate, inclusive future. We must instill in them the understanding that every life is precious, that no one should be persecuted because of their race, religion, or nationality. The fight for human rights is ongoing, but with vigilance and concerted action, we can hope to prevent future genocides.